When I turned 70, I began noticing something strange. People were treating me differently, but I couldn't figure out why. Waiters approached me more quickly. Strangers seemed slightly more attentive. At first, I thought it was just coincidence. But the pattern kept repeating. And the more it happened, the more confusing it became. Because nothing about my life had really changed. I hadn't become richer. I hadn't become more successful. So what exactly was different? That question stayed in the back of my mind for weeks. And strangely enough, the answer appeared on an ordinary evening in a crowded restaurant. It was the kind of place where everyone seems slightly important. Business suits, polished shoes, quiet conversations about work and investments. The sort of place where people try very hard to look impressive. I was sitting with a friend when the door opened and a man walked in. At first, there was nothing remarkable about him. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't loud. He didn't walk in like he owned the place. But something unusual happened almost immediately. People noticed him. Not dramatically, not in a loud way. It's just small, subtle glances. A waiter moved toward him quickly. A couple of people briefly looked up from their conversations. Even the atmosphere of the room seemed to shift slightly. It was so subtle that most people probably didn't notice it at all. But I did, and it made me wonder something. What exactly made this man stand out? Without trying to stand out. I leaned toward my friend and whispered a slightly ridiculous question. Is that man secretly famous? Or am I imagining things? My friend looked at him for a moment and smiled. No, he said. That's just quiet confidence. I laughed at the time. But the more I watched that man, the more curious I became. Because he wasn't doing anything impressive. He simply sat down. He listened more than he spoke. And when he did speak, it was calm, slow, and deliberate. And somehow, people seemed to pay attention. That was the moment something clicked in my mind. But I didn't fully understand it yet. In fact, it took me several weeks to begin noticing the real pattern. Because once you start looking for it, you realize something surprising. Certain older men seem to carry a quiet presence that draws attention naturally. They're not trying to dominate the room. They're not trying to prove anything. And strangely enough, that's exactly what makes them noticeable. But here's where the story becomes interesting. Because the more I thought about that evening, the more I began questioning my own behavior. For most of my life, I believed confidence meant speaking more, explaining more, proving that I knew what I was talking about. Maybe you've noticed the same thing. When we're younger, we often think the loudest person in the room must be the most confident one. But is that actually true? Or is it possible that real confidence looks completely different? That question stayed with me for a while, so I started paying attention to small things. The way I spoke, the way I reacted in conversations, the way I sometimes rushed to explain myself, and slowly, I began experimenting with something different. Speaking a little less, listening a little more, pausing before responding. At first, it felt unusual, almost uncomfortable, but something interesting began happening. People started leaning in when I spoke. Conversations felt calmer. Even disagreements became easier to handle. And that's when the realization finally became clear. The men who quietly command attention aren't trying to impress anyone. They're simply comfortable with themselves. They don't feel the need to fill every silence. They don't rush to prove their value. And because of that, their presence feels calm and controlled. Eventually, the truth became obvious. The quieter I became, the more people seemed to respect me. Not because silence is powerful by itself, but because calm behavior signals something deeper. It signals control. And people instinctively recognize that. Once I understood this, I began seeing the pattern everywhere. In restaurants, in conversations, even in simple social gatherings. The men who moved slowly, spoke carefully, and listened patiently often carried the strongest presence in the room. And the fascinating part is that most of them probably weren't trying to create that effect at all. It simply came from years of experience, patience, and self-confidence. Which brings us to something hopeful. This kind of presence isn't something you're born with. It's something that develops over time. And more importantly, it's something anyone can practice. You don't need a louder voice. You don't need to impress people. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply slow down. Observe more, speak less, and allow your presence to say more than your words. Because true respect rarely arrives with noise. More often, it grows quietly. And once you begin practicing that calm confidence, something interesting happens. People start noticing you in a completely different way. Not because you demanded attention, but because your presence quietly earned it. And if this idea resonates with you, consider subscribing for more conversations about confidence, presence, and the quiet strength that often grows stronger with age. Because in the next video, we're going to explore something even more surprising. The one silent habit that makes certain older men not just respected, but truly unforgettable.